intanto da bere, da mangiare, facciamo colazione. E benvenuti e benvenute a tutti e a tutte alla Creative Mornings Bolzano. E è una proposta che facciamo come Waystation. Waystation è un'associazione che vive in questa casa, ha l'ufficio in questa casa e fa attività in questa casa, ma che in realtà esiste da 10 anni e si occupa di lavoro e creatività. Questi sono i nostri temi, cerchiamo di svilupparli con eventi, con formazioni, con consulenze tutti i mesi, con una community formata da creativi e creative del territorio a cui ci si può iscrivere e che serve anche per appunto conoscersi e collaborare. Creative Mornings invece è da più di un anno che l'abbiamo portato a Bolzano, ma è un network internazionale che parte dall'America e che diciamo ogni mese lancia, come vedete ci sono 238 città in più di 60 stati nel mondo che fanno colazione tutti assieme e in una giornata sullo stesso tema. Il tema di questo mese è thread sì, vai tranquilla. E abbiamo deciso di parlarne con Nuno Escudeiro, regista che in questi giorni è al Festival Analogica, a cui vi invitiamo ulteriormente a partecipare. È iniziato ieri, dura fino a domenica, e è un festival totalmente dedicato all'analogico, in particolare al film, ma non solo, e alle pratiche in generale analogiche, che si svolge qui e negli spazi della Zelig e al Fotoforum. Il workshop però è sold out, quindi non vi invito perché non si può più accedere. E appunto ieri abbiamo visto un film di Nuno, questa sera di nuovo Nuno sarà in un talk, però insomma oggi ci parla del nostro tema e proveremo anche a condividerlo in qualche maniera, quindi grazie. Ti lascio la parola. Ovviamente per chi non è mai stato potete prendere tranquillamente da fare colazione.
Andrebbe bene per tutti se faccio la presentazione in inglese? Okay. Just shift to English. Just because it's easier for me. I'm Nuno Escudeiro. I actually live in Bolzano for 10 years now. I did the Zelig Film School here. And yeah, I'm very happy about this invitation because it came in this moment where I was exploring something that I've been developing as an idea that is something very simple, and that I wanted to share with you, so that I wanted to put into words and to organize, and so that's what I'm going to share with you. And this concept threads came quite well because what I was exploring is like how do the events of our life, the things that happen throughout our life, like how do we give meaning to them? How do we continue to change the meaning of them throughout our life? How do they make part of our story? And most of all, how do we use them in our work? How do they keep on influencing us many years? And do we keep re-evaluating them? And I find it's quite. And I find and so this was the idea. What I was trying to think is like, okay, so what has brought me to do the work that I do? What has brought me to be the person that I am? The things that I'm exploring? What are the events throughout my life that kind of influenced my practice and that influenced what I'm doing now? And I think it's something that I find that's quite interesting when you meet an author that works in cinema, an author that is a writer, is that they always have a very, the best work that I know always comes from something very personal, from themes that people are developing throughout their life. And I wanted to, and especially this concept that for me is very important, that not to look at these events as like points that define our biography, define who we are, but as like threads that continue up until today, and that we keep on rethinking, we keep on elaborating on, and we keep on developing. And so this mixed with an invitation to talk about my work and to show little pieces of my work, and so this presentation was born. This presentation on threads, on the things that make me the person that I am, like who am I, why am I talking about the things that I talk about, and a bit for us to reflect all together. I was going to ask you about it, about certain events in our lives that kind of are really making the people who we are. And so I made just a timeline just to help me. It's not so important what's written, it's just for me to be a guideline. I decided to make this timeline about me. Sorry to be egocentric today, I'm going to talk about myself, but there is a point, and I will tell you. So, as I told you, I was born in Portugal. I was born in this small town called Tomar. And Tomar is a very special city, because it's a city where basically all the narratives of the world pass through there. It's a very small town, it's 20,000 people in the inland of Portugal, but because it was where the Portuguese kings would be elected, so like the Portuguese and the Spanish Empire got merged there. There is a super workers' movement 100 years ago. So basically, even though it's almost insignificant city, it's in the world history, everything happened through there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. And I think it's like, as I was saying, like finding these events, and it's finding about who we are. You know? And so the moment we are born, the places we are born are quite relevant, even though it's like a passive action. We're born into a place, we don't choose where we're born to. But I think it's, now looking back, thinking about how was this place relevant for what I'm doing now, this is the answer that I found. And then I would say like that these events, that influences, they don't always happen while we're alive. And one story that is very important and that I keep going back to is actually a story of my father. And it's not necessarily in a positive way, but my father was, he was working in a factory when he was 15. Portugal was quite industrial back then, quite poor. So people would go to work very early on, and then when he was 18, he went to the army. During the revolution, the Portuguese Revolution, he got very politicized there. He comes back to the factory, and he tries to organize this revolution inside this factory. And he kind of ends up betrayed by his comrades, and so this is like big trauma of his life, is that we don't have, our beliefs will betray us, and you shouldn't talk about the things that you believe. And of course I inherit this, and I fight it a bit because it's like he's always telling me, don't tell people what you believe in, don't speak out because it's dangerous, and I end up being a filmmaker doing political films. It's just completely the opposite. But it's my way of processing the way that I was educated and contradicting it, and this belief that we need to, or it's like it's not such an obvious thing, but it's also my research. It's like, can we trust the world around us? How can we organize with other people around us to make the world a bit better place? And these are themes that keep reappearing in my films. And it's like, it's funny because it's about things that happened 11 years before I was born. So another important story that I tell about myself was that I was 18. I was in my schoolyard, and back then in Portugal you do your national exams to go into university, and you would get this big book with all the courses that you could apply to. And I remember being in this courtyard, and there being this couple of not close friends, but friends of mine, and there was this woman that was going through the book, and she was like marking all the universities where you could study cinema. And that was the moment where I learned that you could study cinema. So it was really not in my vocabulary that somebody can study cinema, because I was coming from a small town in the province, from a working class, middle class family. And this is, for me, it's very important because it really helps me define where do I come from, which kind of context. And in Portugal, that is a very classist society. If you don't come from a rich family, from Lisbon, nowadays it has changed, but like it's not like you have in your imaginary. Of course, you can go and study cinema. There are schools for it, but you don't really have this perception that you can do it. Then 10 years later, I entered Zelig here. So it took me 10 years from understanding that actually people can study to be filmmakers to actually start studying to be a filmmaker. And these are important stories because it's really always about reevaluating where do we come from, what did we fight against to do the things that we do, and where do we get the strength to do the things that we do. And then I had, that is kind of the basis of this workshop, of this talk. I went to these great workshops in 2012 that were in the Netherlands, and I met these two friends that then became friends. They were like teaching this workshop, and they gave me a very simple concept that for me was not obvious at all, but now I'm basing everything that I'm telling you now. That is like, they had these workshops that mixed art making and personal development. And the concept that they gave me that was very simple was like, if you want to be a good artist, you need to be a good person, in the sense that if you want to work on your craft, in your art making, then you also need to work on yourself. It's about self-development, it's about a road to develop yourself, to be a better person, to be very aware of who you are, of your story, because with this you can do great art, or you can do have a great practice. And I think this is valid transversally. It's not only about filmmaking, it's not only about writing, it is about design, it's about working in a factory, it's about everything. The better you are in charge of your own story, the better your art making is, or the more aware, the richer it is, because you're bringing in everything that you are and where you come from into your work. I think I will try not to repeat this again, I said it already many times. Yeah, and so this is like a bit background how I fell into filmmaking and how I fell into working in the way that I do. So I'm going to tell you about the films that I'm working on and how they are fed from these stories. So one narrative that is important for the work that I do is that between the 60s and the 70s there was a big wave of migration from Portugal, especially to France, but to Germany as well. And these were people that were escaping the colonial war. They didn't want to go to fight in Africa in the name of an empire that was completely decadent, and people were just escaping fascism. I don't have these stories in my family, but they are like super overwhelming in Portugal. Like the parents of one of my best friends have this story. It's very common. Then we jump to 2011, where I myself get out of Portugal. It was the years of the Troika, things were pretty nasty, pretty horrible, and I felt there was something strange about what we were being told in Portugal and by Europe. It's like, you are lazy people, you need to suffer, you need to change the way that you do things, because as Southern Europeans, Greek, Italians, Portuguese, you are the pigs and you need to change everything that you do in this context of crisis. And me leaving Portugal because I didn't want to put up with that shit, I went to Finland, and this was 13 years ago. And it was also an important step because like I don't feel so much that the word migrant fits me, except when I'm in Portugal, and there you are a migrant, and then you're treated, you left like the people in the 60s left, you are one of those. But I'm never made feel like a migrant anywhere, just feel like a person. But whenever I go back to Portugal, I become a migrant, and I like it very much. And my whole experience, I like to feel like that, that's true. And my whole experience in Finland in the 2 years that I lived there was really to become a migrant, because I was meeting the first refugees I've ever met in my life. I had friends who are political activists from all over the world. I met people from Russia from the first time. Like, it was this small world, like this small place where the whole world came through. And this culminates in another thing that was something that I was already talking about today. That in the moment where I'm here studying in Zelig and the borders get closed, and I see that people suddenly are blocked on borders, and this was a situation that already happened to Portuguese people in the 60s and the 70s. I felt that there was something a bit off with how it's so easy that we dehumanize people, how it's so easy that we become violent against people and that we employ state violence for people who are just arriving. And these people were Portuguese 40 years ago, now are from Africa and from Asia, and history repeating itself. And so I started working on these topics, and I started going back to my foundation issues that I was talking about, my father in a factory, like not believing that we can do the world a better place, not believing that we can organize and do things differently. So this was my approach for this. So like, how are we, people from the borderlands, reacting to this situation? And this resulted in my first feature film, and I'm gonna show you a trailer, of it.
Ah, regardez avec quoi il marche. Oh, oui.
Suis.
Dieu suis.
Demande de asile.
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 Au départ, j'étais complètement illégal. Et maintenant, ça devient le contraire en fait. C'est que l'État crée des personnes en situation irrégulière et moi je crée des personnes en situation irrégulière.
Même si nous, on est sûr d'être dans le bon droit, ben c'est quand même bien et c'est nécessaire de faire appel à un avocat.
Give flower to police? Okay.
Oui, vous pouvez faire de la garde à vue, illégalement. L'État se faisait passer pour dire la loi c'est de mon côté, la loi c'est moi. Nous avons rappelé que non.
On t'appelle, on te dit tiens, il y en a 3 à la gare qui ne savent pas où aller dormir, 5 h du matin, pareil, et tu jongles avec les gendarmes pour essayer d'arriver avant eux.
C'est incroyable quand même. Tous ces gens quoi.
And so that was the point of what I was saying. It's not only that certain things from my life, from my collective history as a Portuguese person that inform the making of this film, but I also come from a perspective that is really mine, from the things that the way that I was educated at home, the things that I learned, the things that I conflict within myself, and to ask these specific questions of political organization, like who are we inside the historical moment, how do we react, and looking for people that are choosing to trust each other, to believe each other, and to make a difference. And these topics keep on coming, like they transform the way that I look into a situation, and that's what makes it interesting. My authorial point of view on an event always comes from the themes that I've been dealing with throughout my life. So now we jump into 600 years ago almost for the next work that I'm doing now. So now the next works I'm going to show you are things that I'm developing now, are things I'm working on. And so back to my hometown Tomar. I told you that a lot of the world's narratives went through there, also the horrible ones. So, and the Templars, when they got illegalized throughout Europe, they got the permission to go back to Portugal, and they came into my hometown, and they changed their name to the Order of Christ, but they were like a very powerful organization. And when the Portuguese started going on boats throughout the world, they were financed and managed by that organization, so from my hometown. And one of the things that happened is that suddenly they got really involved into slave trade, and particularly into this place, and there is this city called Grampopo. That was a place where there was the first slave trade deal ever written between my hometown and this city. Another seemingly irrelevant story for now. I will explain where I'm going with this. In the 1950s, there was massive floods in this place, and a lot of people died, and it was like a big catastrophe. And it leads back to into 2016, when I go to Benin to make research about the history of slave trade in that region, the relationship of Portugal and slave trade there. And I was walking on the beach, I go to Grampopo, I learned that this place has this history, and there was a man called Roger that finds me on the beach, and he says, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Portugal." "Ah, come and see the houses that your ancestors built." And he brings me into this village, and this village is there are these palaces in ruins. And these palaces are quite beautiful, but they are in ruins. And I asked him, is this everything? And he says, "Yeah, everything else is already under the ocean." And this struck me a lot, because then I started doing a project about this place. And this place has a very particular history, not only that, but because it's located between the river and the sea, and is being flooded by both sides. And especially this old historical center where I'm doing my work, they are flooded twice a year by the river and 1 to 2 times by the sea. So it's this place that is about to disappear. And there is something very fascinating about it, is that they say that the sea has risen 20 kilometers throughout the last 100 years. But if you look at maps, or if you look at the history of the place, it doesn't seem to be true. The sea has risen a little bit, but not much. But the sea is continuing to rise. We know that it's going to rise, and that city is going to be erased in a way. But this historical movement of disappearing, it's not so certain that it happened. And we go back to another personal story that I'm going to mix in here. So I have a very good friend of mine that was where we grew up together. We know each other for 20 years, and she was one of the most incredible people I've ever met. She was super political, an amazing person. I remember seeing her, that's what I wrote, in these political assemblies, being very, very proactive, very vocal. I remember seeing her, she worked in one of the best music labels in Portugal. She organized festivals, a really amazing person. And when I met her this year, she was with a huge depression, and she had a narrative about herself that was about I was never worth anything, I never did anything special in my life. And I'm putting these two stories together because they have a parallel, and it's about this topic of threads. Is that both her and this place, are narrating the whole life story and all the events that happened to her based on what's happening to them now. So my friend was depressed, whose life was amazing and really brilliant. In the moment that she's depressed, she doesn't see it. She only sees that the life was really shitty. Then in the same way, Grampopo, in the moment where they had this huge story, in the moment that is threatened with disappearance, it's telling this story that it was always meant to disappear. The sea has been rising throughout time, and it's going to be erased. And it's going back to our topics, why is it important that we look at our events in a positive sense, and that we keep reevaluating them in the good sense, is that we look back into our past and we see the good things, that we don't fall, that because something bad is happening to us now, that we're gonna disappear. And so I started a bit exploring this in my new film, that is about this sense of how does our humanity change and our perception of ourselves change in the moment that we are threatened with disappearance. So I'm going to show you a trailer of the film that I'm working on now. It's not a ready film. It's just a trailer for getting funding, but where I'm exploring these topics about a culture defining itself by what's about to happen to them.
Il y a une première bonne qui est ici. Donc, je suis depuis à côté de l'auberge. Donc, il y en a comme ça qui passent. Dans les maisons qui sont comme ça seront détruites. Nos grands-mères sont nées ici. Elles sont mortes ici. Nous aussi, on est nés ici. On va mourir ici.
Ecco, vieni così. E anche io mi addo che mi le la dua mia, a me nulla non veramente. A me nulla non veramente. Mi io fino a vio mi io loco attivo, cajago mi io we, mi le io mi ame. Bebu mi io se vezeton, ale che mi belle lo pata, mi bio mi de kenya fuya. Le na be cheche na ma ba do mi be cheche na ni ba do hwe. Ba do gagbelo.
Once again, like I was telling you, it's about how do we approach a certain situation with a specific look. On one hand, this idea that okay, they have a narration of themselves about what they're about to face, and but I'm also looking at the part where like okay, so how do you stand up into a fight within your community to react to that, and now go back to these topics to see how this culture is dealing with it. Yes, and I'm gonna tell you one third example, like that is connecting all these things. That is another film that I'm working on right now. So we go back to 1992, and I am 6 years old, and there is these massive fires around my hometown. And I remember that I was, my parents took me to my grandmother's house, and because the fires were coming to my other house, and then I'm woken up in the middle of the night, and we were taken out, and there is this sea of flames around my grandmother's house. I remember my grandmother running with a bucket to put out the fire. I remember then that like we got into a car to get away from the fire, and I remember seeing this church in flames, completely in flames. and it was really marking images. And the thing is that these wildfires are keeping on getting more and more intense. And in 2017, already there was these huge fires in Portugal where like 200 people died. And this year again, there was this massive fires that destroyed like a big part of the country. And it's really getting more intensified by climate change, and in a similar way to what's happening to Gran Popô, we are living on this moment where the situation is going to get worse. You know? And I think of this in this parallel, no? That my memories when I was a child of that fire somehow justify, somehow they put me in the same kind of thinking that whatever, that this is always meant to be, it's only going to get worse. That because already since I'm a child, these fires are repeating themselves, and it's only going to get worse. And there is this kind of mentality of like also telling a story from the impending doom. So what I'm trying to do with this project is doing it something a bit different. Is to say like, okay, we all have responsibility about the state of this country. Like I'm not going to look into the past with this vision of doom, but I'm trying to say what is my responsibility within this place. What can I do to really change this environment? And I'm doing a film that is really like asking these questions. And just before I show you the teaser of the next one, that's my last dot that I put. Like man makes sense of its origin. So like in this film, I'm really putting all the themes together that I kind of told you about. And I'm going to show you a trailer of what I'm doing now. Just one thing to explain you, like one of the main causes of proliferation of fires is that the country is covered in industrial forest, in eucalyptus. Then some of these eucalyptus were planted by my grandfather. That's just to explain the beginning of the trailer.
Isso foi teu avô. Teu avô Alvin. O pai da tua mãe é que pôs o dedo. A maior parte foram postos nessa altura, sobre que dava muito dinheiro, que era o futuro. Como há muito e as lojas não precisam, os intermediários baixam o preço. Isto nada é rentável, as pessoas abandonaram isto por completo.
Regresso ao interior de Portugal, depois de 10 anos a viver no estrangeiro. Encontro um território cada vez mais consumido pelo abandono e pelas chamas. Procuro na minha família uma resposta ao porquê desta terra estar assim hoje.
É? Sim. Portanto, olha, ali naquele portão ali, era a máquina que fazia o papel selado, foi a primeira máquina onde eu trabalhei, máquina de produção. Isto em 68. 68 até 74. Olha, aqui é que era a máquina do teu avô. Mas cheguei aqui a ter alguma preponderância, tive momentos bons e maus. Mas antes do 25 de Abril tudo bom. Depois do 25 de Abril foi a Revolução. Mas não ponhas isso da Revolução, não vale a pena. Eu não quero conflito.
Há 50 anos atrás, a revolução dos meus pais derrotou o fascismo. Procuro pelos meus pais no meio das multidões. Imagino-os a lutar aqui no meio. Nestas imagens procuro a esperança de um futuro melhor, que hoje desapareceu completamente deste território.
Contra o fascismo! Contra o imperialismo! Pela democracia e poder para o povo! Pela vitória
podemos nós lutar-os neste mundo dos sonhos. Quanto tempo é que achas que ainda vai tomar conta disto?
Não sei, isso aí Deus é que sabe. Mas o máximo de 5, 6. Vai correr bem. Pode ser que venhas tu tomar conta. Deve ser difícil. O dia da manhã a gente ainda não ouviu, mas acho quase que sim.
Nós somos trabalhadores e temos força na vida. Todos juntos combinados formamos a vida. A nossa estrela vermelha, como ela não há igual. Foi a primeira a formar-se cá dentro de Portugal. Foi a primeira a formar-se cá dentro de Portugal. Anda, camarada, anda, vamos fazer união. Anda, camarada, anda, vamos fazer união. Avante a estrela vermelha, abaixo a reação.
And so this is what I wanted to share with you, and it's like a way of, this film kind of puts together all my topics that I've been working on, from migration, from political organization, from how we deal with our past, how we deal with our present, how we deal with the upcoming challenges that we are. And it's like only by making sense, as the message that I wanted to leave with you, only by making sense of our own narrative, of all the things that we've been through, that I really reach. There's something that I wanted to tell you that I forgot. Like, when I started studying film, I was really thinking that there is nothing particular about me to tell stories. I'm a very normal person, that don't have a special story. And by re-evaluating all the things that happened through my life and my family, I actually realized that I have a lot to say, and I've lived a life that is very complex and where a lot of narratives walk through. And I think this is something that we all have, that we need to take our time and our space to understand who we are, and especially if we want to do work as authors, we can all learn, we can all understand that we actually have a lot that has crossed through our life that gives us the authority and the authorship to express something. I have also a proposal for you. Now we're going to have some breakfast, and while we're doing it, I drew a timeline here in the back, and I have an invitation that each one of us just goes there and marks a date and an event that they feel that in a way define their own story and define who they are. And then 10 minutes before we close, that if whoever wants to share what that event was and what it was about, I would love to hear about it. That's it. So have a nice breakfast, and thank you for listening to me.